are available here. Starting with the authentication filter, the authorization filter, and then you have the action filter, result filter, and exception filters. So let's try and understand these two steps. Authentication, authorization are very closely linked together and deal with the security mechanism out here. Like for example, the first step in any system is the authentication. Authentication asks the question, who are you? All right. So for example, if you're trying, if we had, let's say, physical class, and let's say I go to the Kharghar center or the Juhu center, the first thing I'm, even when I walk in every day, I'm stopped at the gate and asked, who are you, right? And I had to identify myself. So typically, I have to sign in the register, in the visitors register, saying that I'm Vikram, for example, and I'm here for a lecture. Now, in your case, for example, you might be assigned an ID card. And if you flash your ID card, then that becomes your authentication. But people who don't have an ID will be required to sign in out there. So that's your who are you identifying, and that is typically given through your login name and password. Okay, so you could have some sort of authentication filters. Once you're authenticated, the second step is authorization. Authorization here deals with, okay, you are so and so, but do you have the permissions to run this particular method or not? And those would be examples of authorization filters that you write. Okay. So I might be, I'll give you a parallel example. I might be a valid user. I might be like, you might be a student of Kharghar or a student of Juhu, but your student access doesn't give you access to get into, let's say, the server room. So that's because you don't have authorization. So here, similarly, authorization deals with how exactly you can specify who has what permissions, right? So that is the second step. So sometimes these authorization filters can also be combined with entries that you give in your config files. And the config files can also supply some sort of filters out here for you. So in our case, for example, when you're writing these sort of filters, it works closely with the config file and is able to work with them. Now, once you've finished the step of authentication or authorization and seeing that, okay, can he access that method or not? The next thing here that you have is the action filters or the result filters. Now, again, both of these are very, very close to each other. The action filter, when you call your action method, so before the method and after the method, right, is your action filter. So you have a, pre and a post. You have a pre and a post. Before the method happens, you could write some code, and after it happens, also you could, write some code. Typically, if you're looking at such methods, the name itself is a giveaway. Like for example, if you have something like, action executing and action executed. So these are the typical methods that you will write, a ting and a ted. Okay, I call it a ting and a ted. So ting happens before and a ted happens after. If you're saying that executing, meaning what you're trying to call that action. So the action has not yet been called. So if you would like to write some code at that point, so that's before the action runs. And action executed. So TED would mean what? The action has already been run. And after that, if you'd like to do that, then you would run the action filter after that. Now, within the action methods itself, typically most methods that you've been writing, what line do you generally write down? in your action method, what is the one standard line that you write in most cases?
So return. I mean,
Return what? Mostly.
The page we want to return it to.
So return view in this case, right? So when you're, so first step is you call the action method. Second step is within the action method, you're doing what? You're returning a view. So when you're returning that view, that return view again causes a result filter to fire off. Okay, so the view that you're returning is your result from that action. And again, if you'd like to run some code before and after, again, there is a concept of executing and executed. So executing would be before the view goes out, if you'd like to run some code, and executed would be after the view runs, then what code you would like to run. So again, there are these, there's sort of action filters and result filters are very similar, because result filters are being called where are you, where is the result being called from? After you call the action. So there is generally, very similar things that are happening in here. And sometimes, when you write one line of code, it might be firing off both. It might be firing off an action filter as well as a result filter. So both of these are very close to each other. In fact, both of these inherit from the same base class. Okay. Now this is the normal flow. When you hit a method, it first tries to authenticate you. Authorization is run. Then the action filters and the result filters are run. So this is a normal method being run. And if there was no code in the method, then there's no problem. But during that execution of the method, if it causes an exception, then you would have the exception filter. So if you handle the exception, then this doesn't run. But if it typically, if you have not handled it, and if on handling it, if you'd like it to do something, you could specify an exception filter. Okay. So there is an inbuilt exception filter here called handled error. All right. And we will look at that, and then we'll also see how we can write our own filters out here. So these are the 5, basic filters that you're writing. I'm going to, today's session is going to be more of a demo. So I'm going to actually run through some of the code. I will share my code with you at the end of the day, and you all can then try it out in the lab at the end of it. Otherwise, there are too many topics to sort of try and cover in 2 hours if I start coding each topic individually. So let me run you through some of the things that I will be doing out here. In fact, I didn't have it open. Okay. All right, so let's start with the action filters. And we're going to be looking at first the authentication and authorization. As I said, the authentication authorization filters run in combination with some of the other filters. So let's see some of these filters. Some of these filters are inbuilt filters wherein you can just use that filter. You don't need to write any code of your own. And then you can create your own filters as well. Okay. So one of the filters out there, now this is an authorization filter, is authorize, right? And authorize is actually inheriting from the authorize attribute. The authorize attribute itself is inheriting from filter attribute and is implementing the I-authorization filter. So, I've not mentioned it here on the screen, but if you want to write, for example, a authentication filter, then you'll need to implement this interface, the I-authentication interface, or an authorization filter will implement the I-authorization interface. Similarly, an action filter will implement what? the I action filter interface. Result filter, I result filter interface. Exception filter will implement the I exception filter interface. So these are the different, if you look at the interface names match exactly with what? With the filter names out there. Okay. Here, if you can see, it's an authorization filter. So that's the type of filter that I'm actually creating. Now this runs before any other filters on the action method. So when you're actually having that action method, is going to actually, that's the first thing that's going to run. Now all that this simply says here, okay, the way, yeah. All that this simply says that if you wanted to access this method, right, you need to be a valid user. You cannot be accessing this method without having logged into the system. Okay. So I have created two methods. Let's say index and update profile. I've marked them as what? As both have marked them as authorized. So if I try to access index or authorize, index or update profile without logging in, then it will automatically take me to the login page. Right? That's what I'm doing. Now you all had also written down code like this. Yes or no? You all had created your own, sort of implementation of this code. How did you write down code for doing that? You had a login page, you had a update profile page, you had a home page. So if the user tried to go to the home page directly, you wouldn't allow him and you would take him to the login page. That was one of the problem statements that I had given you. And the last 2 days you would have worked on it, but I didn't get a chance to check your code out there. So my question to you is, if you have written that code, how would you have implemented that code? What would you have done?
So we did it using cookies. I mean, like
using a session variable.
Yes, session variable. Oh.
Because if you have not said remember me on your cookie, the cookie was not being set. So you all actually created a session variable. So when he logged in, you set the session variable, and then all other pages where he's trying to access it, if the session variable is not set, you all were redirecting him to the login page. So you wrote code on your own. You wrote manual code to do that. But here, this should be automatically done for you. And I'll show you how it's automatically happening. Now, similarly, there's a register page. Now, the register page didn't require any authentication. So anybody could go to the register page. Agree? You didn't have to be logged in to go to the register page, right? Otherwise, that would have been crazy. Imagine, how do you log in? You first must register. How do you register? You must first log in, so that it doesn't work out that way. So the register page has been given an allow anonymous attribute. And if you look at the allow anonymous attribute, this is not, doing any authorization or whatever. It simply says is that that the user need not be logged in to access this page. Allow the anonymous user to be logged in to access this page. So pages that you want to be accessed or to be first logged in and then accessed would be through this. And pages that you don't, you allow with the anonymous access. I'm also going to use a non-action out here, right? So non-action is basically something that should not be treated as an action. So for example, if you mark this, do something as a non-action, if I, in my URL, if I say, this is home/do something, it'll give me an error saying that, there is no method out here. So how do you say that? See, now there are three things. We are saying what? First method says what? Person must be logged in. Allow anonymous says what? Need not be logged in. And the third one says that cannot go to this method at all. So this is a non-action method. It will not be treated like a regular action method, even though it may be returning something. So typically any methods that are not returning a view, you should mark them as non-action. Here I've not done that. I just marked any method, but any method marked as non-action cannot be called from the URL directly. All right. Now I also have a login this thing. I also have a login this thing, login controller. What is the login controller doing here? Specifying that I can go to the login without having to, obviously without having to log in, right? Okay. And okay, there's a logout method here, which can be called only if this person has already logged in. All right. So logout I can directly give in from the URL. I don't have to do anything. Now, so I'm using a filter, but I'm also in this example, I've actually mixed up two examples. So this is how you'd use an authorization filter. What is the one that we use? Authorize. That was a simple listing. But now the authentication itself, how are you going to write down the code for that? How are you going to use one of the authentication things out here? So either you can create your own filters, and which is a little more complex code, or I have actually combined this with web.config. So in my web.config, I have a few other entries out here. So one of the entries here is what authentication mode I should use. Okay, what authentication mode I should use. And secondly, this is the first part. And secondly, the authorization section, which says allow or deny certain users. There are different authentication modes that you can give out here. Okay, so let's see what the authentication modes are. Okay, none says that you don't need to be authenticated to visit this website. So what sort of websites will you have authentication mode as none? Typically any websites wherein you're not required to log in, wherein you can visit any page without having to log in. General purpose information page where there are links to go from one to the other, but the user is not required to log in out there. So authentication mode would be none out there. Now, if you had an intranet, with limited number of users that are managed by an administrator on the website. I'll repeat, if you had typically an intranet type of application, wherein your number of users are limited, and who's adding or removing users, they're not going to register the page. Instead, an Windows administrator is adding or removing users out here. Now, such a type of authentication would be called as Windows authentication, right? Typically used for intranets. So, for example, let's say I'm just giving an example. I don't know whether CDAC uses it or not, but let's say I log on to CDAC in the morning. So, CDAC employee comes in and logs on to CDAC. So now while logging on to CDAC, what is the username and password he's giving? He's giving the credentials given by a administrator to him. So he would have a Windows username and a Windows password to log on to CDAC, to the CDAC system. So that is what I'm talking about. Now, if I want to register myself on the site, that is not going to work out. This is only limited number of users created by an administrator. Okay. Now, if you have a website that is a public website that is not, controlled, which is like only limited number of users, but if it's, on the internet, and if you want people to be able to come in and log in on your register on your website, and then, after registering, then log in from there, and you're providing your own login page. Now, such authentication mode is called as forms authentication, where you're providing a login form where the user would go and log in out there, or you're providing a registration form where the user will go and register out there. So this is your second type of authentication mode. Forms, or earlier was Windows, now it's forms. The third type of authentication, passport authentication, uses the passport service that Microsoft provides and allows you to you register or log in on a website accordingly. Your details are stored on the passport website. So this is the service. It's an authentication service that it's using. And it's like a third-party tool that you're using that does your authentication for you. Okay. Who's storing the usernames and passwords in this case? The service. You're not using it. You're using a service to do this. So this option I'm not taking up out here, but this is a paid option. This is not a free option. All right. And you could use the passport service for your authentication. The other option that you have here is a federated authentication. So federated authentication, federation typically works where you have a group of sites. Like for example, if you go to Gmail and you log on to Gmail, without having to log in again, you can access G Drive, Google Drive, or you can access, let's say, what do you say? What is that? Google Documents, right? Or Google Sheets, or let's say photos. So all the other related applications that are there, you can easily access if you have logged in once. So now this sort of authentication is called federated authentication. It's for a group of sites. So how does it do it? What it does is it says that if you have logged in at one place, it gives you a ticket. It creates a ticket for you. And this same ticket is valid on any of its other sites. So this ticket is actually carried as a cookie. Internally, it's stored as a cookie. And when you log in, a cookie is set. Now, when you go to any other website which matches that cookie is validated, saying that has he logged in on any of our sister websites. And if that cookie is there, that means you have logged in out here. So now, instead of just one site, you have multiple sites relying on a cookie-based authentication. The federated authentication is very similar to what we are going to be doing using forms authentication. So whatever you're doing in federated will be also, similar things in forms, the way in which it works. Both federated and forms, both of these use cookie-based authentication. Okay. So I'll keep it back to the way it was earlier, which was forms authentication. Now, what is it going to do? When it first tries to access that method, which method are we talking about? In this case, when it comes to this method, let's say the authorize for this one. So if I go to home/index, if authorize is set, it says what? To access this, you must have a cookie created. Now, we are not creating the cookie. Somebody else is creating the cookie. So you must have a cookie created. And if the cookie is created, then what? Then you are able to access my page. And if you're not able to, if the cookie is not there, then what would I do? What would I do then? I'll throw you back to the start point, to a login page. So this information is actually given in your web.config, saying that this is the login URL. If you have not logged in, then this is where it should be taking you to. And secondly, what do you think this is? Second part here. Second part here is what? Very simple actually. Timeout would be what? How long that cookie should be kept alive. So if there is no request coming in for 20 minutes, the cookie will be removed. Every time a new request comes in, the cookie gets a further extension of 20 minutes. So for 20 minutes, if you don't do anything, then it's throwing you out. You can reduce the time here if you want to. I have given a default time of 20 minutes. Now let's look at the code for my login itself. Let's see what we are doing in the login. And in the login, there are two parts to this. First, of course, is display the view. Display the view, that's the get for the login. And in the post for the login, in the post of the login, I'm getting the details as, this is very similar to what you all have done. Getting the details as, a class, user class. User has two properties, username and password, which I am right now validating by checking whether it is A and B. Ideally, where will this be checked up from? Any database that you're having. So you would actually run this code against the database and see whether it's a valid username or not. I'm not doing that. I'm actually just creating a hard-coded value of A and B. So A and B is a valid login. So if that is true, then there's again an inbuilt class called forms authentication. And forms authentication class here has a method called set authentication cookie. So if it's a valid user, create the cookie. Remember, this is also called cookie-based authentication. To check whether you were logged in or not, we in our code were using a session variable. Instead of a session variable, what is this using? What is this using? A cookie. Now, in the cookie also, there are two options. First is, what is the username that you want to set for the cookie? And secondly, whether you want to create it as a persistent cookie. Persistent meaning? What do I mean by persistent cookie? A cookie which will not be deleted when you close the browser. Right? If you close the browser, if it was an impersistent cookie, the cookie will be immediately deleted. Here, when will the cookie be deleted? When will the cookie be deleted?
If it expires or we delete it by
when will it expire is my question.
in minutes.
Yeah.
Timeout whenever.
No. That's why I asked you. So it will not expire in 20 minutes. It will not expire in 20 minutes.
No, sir. We set time for cookies also, no? For it to
Right.
expire.
So this is not to do with that time. That timeout that we had there was if you have not logged in, if you have not sent a request. If you have not sent a request, then how long should it be created by default? So there it is, a 20-minute time that I'm giving. If you send a request, then it gets an extension of 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes for every request. Now this here, if you say it's a persistent cookie, it will never be deleted. It will only be deleted when you log out. So here, when you sign out, that's when the cookie will be deleted. Like on a Google this thing, when is your this thing deleted? If you have signed into Google, when will it be deleted? When does that login of yours expire?
After sign out.
Only when you sign out. Same thing here. This would only expire when you sign out, not on the expiry of that cookie timeout. So this is a persistent cookie. A cookie that will be retained even after the thing is gone. Okay. All right. Now have a look at this. The return URL is the, I'll show you when you run the code, now what happens. On the top, no, it shows you the return URL. Okay, so I'll come back to this code. So let's start with, if it is a valid user, then what will happen? If it's a valid user, then what will happen? If it's a valid user, what are we doing? We are
Creating a cookie.
Creating a cookie.
we are saying he's logged in. Now, until he logs out, he will remain logged in. Are we clear on this? All right, so let's try this. Look at my start. Where am I going to? By default, where am I going to? Login example / login. That's where I'm going to. But instead of going to login example / login, if I try going to home / index, if I try going to home / index, what is it going to do right now?
Take us to the login page.
Take us to the login page. I don't know whether this is the startup object. Let me recheck that in my code. Okay. I might have changed the startup object. No, this is a different one. That's what I thought. Yeah. So I'll make the authentication as the startup project and run it again. The other project was running. I got a second project in there. That was the one that was running. And let's try running this. All right, so I've tried to go to home/index. And even though I've tried to go to home/index, it's taken me to where? To the login page. Why did it take me to the login page?
Because cookies are not created.
Cookies are not created. So I'll show you again. Even if I try doing this forcefully, there was another update profile also there. Okay, home/update profile. What is it again doing now? Taking me back to the login page. And what is coming in the return URL? What is the return URL is showing me? Home and then update profile. It's showing me home, and then this is the escape character for the slash, and then the update profile. Again, I'll show you one more thing. Let's say if I try going to home/index. So where is it now? Return URL showing me what again? Home index. That is what it's showing me. So what is the return URL telling me? It's trying to tell me which page I tried to go to, and I was not able to go there. So therefore, it has thrown me to where? To the login page. Now, what is the other possibility? Other possibility is I might have come to the login page directly. In which case, what will be the return URL? In this case, what is the return URL? Nothing. Right? Nothing. Okay. Are we clear on this? Did you understand why it took me to the login page? Why it took me to the login page? Why did it take me to the login page? Because of authorize is saying that you're not logged in, so I'm throwing you there. What if I tried going to register? What if I tried to go to home/register? Will it allow me to do that?
Yes, sir, it allows.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Let's try doing that. What if I did home/register? And I try running this now. Now I'm trying to go to home/register. Now it will show me that register page. If I have the register page up and function, I may not have it. Okay, it's just a simple dummy page that I've created. Are you getting this? Why did register work? Why did register work, but the other one didn't? What did register have?
Add anonymous attribute.
Anonymous would be that. So that's your authorization filter has been set here, which is why it's running. All right, let's take this further. Now, in my login controller, now can you help me with this code? What is this doing? Did you understand what this return URL is? What is return URL now? Return URL is the value on your URL. If you try to go to some other page and if it threw you to login, the return URL will contain what? The URL of the page that you are trying to go to. So what am I simply doing out here? What am I simply doing out here?
Redirecting.
If it is not null, what am I doing? I'm going to what?
Redirecting to the
page that you was trying to go to. So
yes.
if it is valid, if username and password is valid, then I will take him to which page now? To the page that he wanted to go to. And if this was not blank, so if this was not blank, we are doing this. If it was blank, then what are we doing? Where am I taking him to? If nothing was then the return URL, then where am I going to? Yes. Then where am I going to? Then I'm going to index/home. Okay, so that's the logic that I'm using. So I'll start off with going to the login page. So let's say login example, and this one was login. If I have logged in, if I go to the page and if I log in correctly, where is it going to take me to from there? Where will it take me to from there? If return URL is blank, take me to index/home. So that's what we're going to try out here. After logging, will he be taken to there? So A and B is what we have out here. Okay, if I've given A and this is B and I log in, now I'm being taken through home/index. Now, why did it not throw me out now? Why didn't it throw me out from home/index?
Return URL was null.
No. Earlier it was throwing me to login, na? If I tried going to home/index, it was throwing me to login. Now why is it not throwing me? Or if I go to home/update profile, now why will this work?
Cookies are created.
Correct. Because I've logged in. Because I've logged in, and when I've logged in, what code have I written there? It says set authentication cookie. Now, how do I log out? What do I do to log out? To log out, you do this login example /logout. So maybe if you have a link on top or whatever, I've not created those links. So if I do a logout, what is this code in the logout doing? It says sign out. So when you sign out now, what will happen now? Cookie is gone. So cookie is gone now. If I try going back again to home/index, what happens? It says, sorry, you must log in. The onus of keeping track of this is being done through what? Is being done through this inbuilt code. I have not written any code out there. This is being automatically done out there. I only written code which says that, okay, if it is valid, log in. If he clicks on log out, then sign out. So this is what we have done to get this working. Questions, if any? So this is a combination of two things. Of the filters that we use, that was one combination. Which filters did we use in this one? Which are the two filters that we used out here? One was authorize and the second was allow anonymous. Both these filters allowed me to do that. So combination of filters and we have also used authentication out here, which we have given in web.config. So in this example, I'm not using the filters. I'm writing my code in here in the web.config. All right. Now,
So-
instead of, yes,
So from where did return URL get its value?
that is automatically done. The return URL is a keyword. So when you have given the authorize attribute, and if you have not logged in and you go to that page, then it throws you to this page. And which page you are trying to go to is given to you as a parameter called return URL. So I have not created return URL. I have not said that it should be called return URL. This is the inbuilt option.
Okay, sir.
Are we clear on how this works? So this was the first example. It's a combination of two concepts that I'm using, because only using the authentication or the authorization filters makes no sense. Only using the filter makes no sense. Filter will only tell you what? If you're not logged in, then take him there. That's all that the filter will tell you. but you have to allow a mechanism for him to log in. No? You have to, how do you keep track of that? Okay, has he logged in or not? Has he, is he an anonymous user or not? So to do that, you have to use some additional code, and which is what I've used in this example. Okay, so that was the first example. Questions, if any, in any of this?
Sir, can you again show that logout, how it works?
See, I have been a little lazy. That's what I'm saying. I'm taking little shortcuts. So what I have done is I have not kept a button called logout, but I've kept an action called logout. When would this action be called? When would this action be called?
When we give in URL.
When you give the URL, the get for the URL you give, it will be called.
Yes, sir.
Yes. So that is what. Now you could have actually done what? You could have kept a button called logout and written this code in that logout. Are you getting this? You could have kept that button called logout, kept it in the post, kept a check whether the button is clicked. If the button is clicked, that post method will be called find out which button is clicked. Have you all done that or not? There is, I think, a page where there are multiple buttons. And then how do you do that? You need to have the variable name, string whatever variable name of that button and check whether it's null or not. So if you'll have created your update profile page, on the update profile page, there were two things. There was the update profile button and there was a logout button. So the same way that you would have written down code earlier, that same way, that mechanism would have been the same. But I have just given you what I've given you just the code. So I'm not creating a button there. I could do that, but I'm just showing you the actual way of doing this. So there's this forms authentication is an inbuilt mechanism, which is how does it know I'm using forms? Where have I specified I should be using forms authentication? In which section have I said that this is enabled? Where have I done that? Forms authentication. Where have I done that?
Configuration.
In web.config. Authentication mode is equal to forms. That is what I'm using. But does that answer your question? Your original question was, where have you written the logout? So have you realized what I've done for logout?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is the first example that I'm done with you. I'm not, I'm not taking further. I'll just be sharing it with you. As I said, I can't, spend a lot of time writing code from scratch this time. So I'm going to show you the finished products. In the second example, I have got a few more filters out here. So let's see what some of these filters are. The first filter that I want to show you here is, okay, we can use this one. So there's a result filter example, or should I, let me take the exception filter. That will be easy to show you. Okay. Now, in your filter config, I don't know if you remember, but there is a file called filter config. In that filter config, it has added this line. It has added this line saying what? Filters.add handle error attribute. And if you look at handle error attribute, okay, this is the class that inherits from filter attribute and also implements I exception filter. So this is an example of the last one, the exception filter. All right. So we have already added this handle error attribute. We are saying that if an exception occurs, if an unhandled exception occurs, then it should do what we are asking this to do in the handle error. And I can go to my controller. I can go to the controller and specify this handle error attribute. So we're saying if an exception occurs, then it should go and call this handle error. Okay. Now what happens normally when an exception occurs? Normally when an exception occurs. Let's try doing this. When an exception occurs normally, like in this case, what am I purposely trying to do? What is the key I'm trying to do out here? What is it I'm trying to do out here?
Divide by 0.
Divide by 0. So let's make this the exception filter example. All right, and action is equal to index. So if I did this, so what will happen now? The index would run, and let's see what it did for you. All right, so divide by 0 exception, and when you run this now, okay, now that error phase is because of this. We already given that handle error attribute. Okay, so let me remove this. So if an exception occurs, right now, of course, it's showing you the exception in your code. And what do you get out here? You get a page like this, correct? That's the default behavior. Agree? Whenever an exception occurs, this is what it shows you. So what is it showing you? It's showing you the line number that caused that exception to handle and why that exception occurred. All of this is being shown to you. So this is useful to you as a developer. Okay, it is useful to you as a developer to know what has happened, but we may not want the end user to see this sort of a page. So what can I do out here? I can create my own, handler out here, how it actually looks out here. So for example, this one, where is it one? My error handler, no, where is it? There's the shared views. Okay. So in the shared views, there's this error.cshtml. So this is the page that I want to show. Now, when would this page be shown? Or instead of that, the page that shows you all the exceptions, I would like to show this page out here, the error.cshtml. Now, how do I do that? How do I ensure that the page is shown out here? If an exception occurs in that code, what can I do to make it show this page? To do so, you can go and give it a handle error exception. What is this handle error? This is actually that attribute that we saw some time back. And if I did that here, right? So if an exception occurs now, instead of that ASP.NET page that came up, which showed you all the exceptions, I'm getting what? I'm getting my error page. Are you getting this, everybody? Now, how have I got this? I've got this because of this handled error exception. Right? Now, I can give this handled error either to the method, and which says what? If there is any exception in this method, then instead of calling the default exception handling code, it will call what? It will call this page from _shared error.cshtml. It will go and call that page. That is the first possibility. You give it at the method level. Second possibility is instead of giving this at the method level, you give it at the class level. If I give it for the controller, what does that imply? What do you think that implies? I've not given it for the method, I've given it for the controller.
So it will be applied for every method, like if any error comes.
If there are many other methods here, for all the methods, you will get the exception. So you don't have to do it at every level. You can do it where at the controller level. So that's the second possibility. But I might have multiple controllers. So if I want this to happen for all my controllers, then I can go to the filter config and give this as a global level filter. And I've added a filter here for handle error exception. So this is my my own filter or my filter given here, which says that if an exception occurs, then this is what I would like it to do. Okay. And what is it going to do right now? See, earlier I forgot to comment this out. So what did it do? If an exception occurred anywhere, it would then go and call that error page of yours. So either method level or secondly, controller level, or thirdly, global filters can be set by giving these things out here. Okay. All right. Now, what I can also do, okay, what I can also do is, if you, I take you back to this, sorry. What I could also do is I can define my own class, which inherits from one of these filters, one of these classes. So my error handler is inheriting from where? Handle error attribute. And when if you look at handle error attribute, this implements IException filter, right? This implements IException filter. So if you go to IException filter, this is one method that you have. What is the one method that it has?
On exception.
So when do you think this would be called? IException filter, the on exception method. When do you think this will be called?
Whenever an exception will occur.
Whenever an exception occurs. And see what I'm doing out here. So this has been defined in the handle error. The on exception. See, handle error implements IException. So it is written on the code for on exception. I am overriding it. So my class is overriding it. So what am I doing now? I'm saying instead of doing the default exception handling code, I will add my own code to it. So what is my own code doing? I'm actually calling a method called log. And what is this doing out here? What is this doing right now? It's doing a debug.write. So it's writing it into the debug window, which says that this is the exception that actually occurred. And instead of writing it into the debug window, instead of writing it in a real world example, where what could you do now? Supposing an exception occurred, you might want to log it to a file or log it to a database or log it, or maybe send an email or take some positive action to log that error and to but to identify what caused that error. All that information can go in here while you're writing this. So now, how would my handle error function, or when would this code be called? When would this be called? Look at this. Instead of handle error, you give it an attribute of what? My error handler out. That's it. So when you give this, the code for this would get called. The code for this would get called. Are we clear on this? So this is my error handler that I've actually written. And all that I've done is inherited from the base class, which is handle error. Handle error by default does something. My class is overriding that behavior. Are we clear on this? So I'm showing you how to create your own custom filters. To create your own custom filters, you have two options. You can either inherit from a base class, first possibility. So you would get all the things that the base class has and then add whatever you need to. Second possibility, we saw the interface names that it supported. So your class can then do what? Can implement these interfaces. And whatever methods are written in these interfaces, you write down the code for that. So that's how you could create your own custom filters. Okay. So this was your exception. This is one of the standard things that you might want to do when working with this. So let's turn our attention to these action and result filters. Let's see how we could do this. So if I have to create my own filter, what did I do in this example? What did I do here? What did I do here in this example?
Inherited the handler attribute.
Inherited from a base class exception, correct? Look at the other one that I'm doing. What is this doing? What is this doing? Inheriting from
action filter attribute.
So if you look at action filter attribute, this action filter attribute is very interesting. This action filter attribute, let's take a look at this, implements both. It implements action filter also, and it implements result filter also. So the action filter is both an action filter also, as well as a result filter. And as I told you that there are four, or rather not four, but two things that are happening per this thing. So look at the first one. When do you think this would take place? On action, let's start with this. Action executing. When would this take place? Executing. The grammar is very easy. If you understand English grammar, then the method name is very easy to understand. So executing versus executed, right? Executing is when it is first called, it is executing that action. So this is a pre-filter. I call these tings and tens. The ting happens before. Then your action is called. And then the TED happens. TED is what? The action has finished. Similarly, result executing, when the result is being called, executing happens. And after it finishes, what? After it finishes, executed. So these are the four things that are happening here. Now, this is the action filter attribute which implemented action filter and result filter. So action filter will have what methods? Will have the first two methods. Result filter will have what methods? Will have the other two methods. So I've created log action filter which implements action filter. And what am I overriding now? What am I overriding? All these four methods I'm overriding. Okay. Now, one of the parameters it receives here is filter context. And with the filter context, there's a property called root data. So the root data will give you what is there in the URL. The root is your URL. So root data gives you whatever is there in the URL. And if you see this, in fact, I have copy pasted this from MSDN site. So if I'm calling what here in this case, I'm calling this method called log, which is receiving root data. And one of the things that this root data will have would be the name of the controller, the name of the action, and I am writing this out in the debug.writeLine. So wherever I apply my log action filter, when I call that method, all these four things will happen for that method. All these four things. What are the four things? action executing, executed, result executing, and result executed. So let's apply one and I'll show you what I mean by that. So for the home controller, what have I done? For the home controller, I've applied log action filter. So if I hit the home page, home index or home about, let's go to home/index. Home/index is what is running first. So when you run this, this is your debug window. Okay. Let me put a breakpoint on home/index. Right. And if you go into the debug window, debug. You see the debug sum anywhere? Let me spot it. I'm not wearing specs. View output window, rather not debug, but output window. Yeah, here. Okay. And see, this is what it is. So I'm actually printing this. Okay, action filter. So that's the one that I'm actually calling. Where's the other? Should actually show me all of the. Where is the? It should have shown me all 4 of them actually. On result executed has only shown. Okay, here earlier. So action filter. So there was the first thing that happened here was what? On action executing, that was the first thing that took place. For which controller? Home. And for which action? Index. Then next one was action has finished executing. So again, that was the same this thing. Then what has happened here in this case? On result executing. So again, what? That is the next thing. And when you ended that, when it finished returning the result, it was the on result executed. So this is actually doing things out here. I could have, instead of printing in the debug window, I could have actually shown it in the, stored in the database. Maybe keep at what time, what this thing is coming. So any logging of information can actually come in out here. So I have created my own custom window, custom this thing. Yeah. So what happens is, these windows, the zoom windows come on top of it. So it's sometimes difficult to see. What you all are seeing is the whole screen. I'm seeing it covered by the zoom window. So sometimes it just covers the whole this thing. So which is why I was not able to spot. And to add to it, I have my specs here, but I don't wear them. Okay. So anyway. So this is what we are trying to do here. So we have created a filter. Now same thing if I run this now. So this is home/index /home/about also will give you the same thing. So again, when you did an about, okay. So these are the methods for about. And these are the information for about. So now any tracing information that you want to do, all of this can be done out here. So I created my own. Which filters have I created on my own? I created my own exception filter and my own action and result filters. Okay. Let's take one more example here. This is again an inbuilt filter that is available, which is the output cache. So if you look at output cache, this is inheriting from action filter, and therefore you have all these methods. All right. It has also got the I exception filter, right? So that other code that we'll be doing. Now this allows you to keep the output of your code. It allows you to cache that. This is again the inbuilt filter. What do I mean by the output of this? It's allowing you to cache it. What it's doing is, when you run the method, like in this case, which method is being run here is the index method. Now I'm saying that the output of this is kept cached for 60 seconds. This is typically used. This will be typically used where if you have some views that are not likely to change over a period of time. Okay, like for example, let's say when CDAC announces this exam results. Okay, now let's assume they put up the results on a web page. I don't know how it's done, but assuming they put it up on a web page. All right, now all the students might be wanting to go and see the results. Correct? And let's assume that CDAC puts your one batch results on one page. So you can actually see all your names on one page rather than individual results. Now, when you do that, every time it has to fetch the results, what code is it actually writing from the page? On the page, what code will it actually write? In the page out here, typically what code will it write? What will be the logic it will use? Yes. What logic would it use? First, this read the value from the database, get it into a collection, pass the collection to the index page, and show the values on the index page. Agree?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Get the results. It needs to read it from the database. Now, every student who's trying to access the result, what is it actually doing? It's reading all the results from the database over and over again. Now, what if we can, make this a little more efficient? What if we say that instead of reading from the database every time, what if we can keep the output of this view cached somewhere? So which means if the first student comes, we will read it from the database and we'll give back the HTML. We'll give back the response to the student. But for the second request that comes, we need not do that all over again because the result will not change. Agree? The result, which is once put in the database, that will not change unless there's some later process where everybody is can apply for a revaluation or whatever. But basically, the result will not change. So if something that is not going to change, why read it from the database over and over again? Instead of that, what can we do? We can keep it cached for a certain duration. Now, that is where the output cache is helping. What is it doing here right now? Keeping it cached for 60 seconds. So for 60 seconds, if I try returning this, what is this going to return to me? For 60 seconds, what is this giving me? Right now, what is it giving? What is this returning?
No, like it should.
Right now, what is it returning? Can you see what it's returning?
So time.
The current date time. Right? So if I see the time now, okay, so the time right now is about 5:41, and is there a breakpoint in here? So 5:41:57, that's what it returned. Now if I run this again, sorry, If I run this again and I send another request, what is it still showing me? What is it still showing
Same
me?
time.
Same
Why?
time.
Why?
It is stored in cache, and for the next 60 seconds it will show the same thing.
Right. What is the advantage of this? What is the advantage of storing into the cache? Why store it into the cache? In our CDAC student example, how did that help?
So because the result is not changing.
How can I, yes, how can I improve on performance is my question.
So the access will be faster.
Correct. So the value, if it has to be read from the database over and over again, and it has to be reformed, that will take time. As opposed to that, if for 60 seconds, now the time has changed, okay? It's gone past 60 seconds. So now see this, now if I do this again, what has it done now? It has again refreshed the value. So you can specify for how long it needs to be done. And you can give it a very long time if you want to. And even if you're reading from the database, you can say that keep it in the cache for a very long time. And the value need not be then refreshed from the database every single time. So data that is not going to change, pages that are not going to be changing frequently, you can think of keeping them in the cache. Now this is an example of what did it use. If you saw this, output cache to use what? It used what? Action filter example. So it is using what? The on action executing, executed, result executing, result executed. What logic it is using? What is the logic it is using? First time that you hit it, the first code that runs is on action executing. So check whether there's anything in the cache or not. So on action executing, check for what? Whether it is the first time that you have to hit the page or whether the page has already been hit before. If it's the first page, then there'll be nothing in the cache. If it's nothing in the cache, ignore, right? Then what do? Then you do your view. What is your view doing? What is the view doing out here? It's returning some data out here. So you typically execute your view. In the view, you will write down code for, reading the value from the database and showing the value. So the view will finish executing. So again, view will be executing and executed. After executed, what should I do? What logic is it using? After the view has executed, what is it doing now? Come on, simple logic now. This, I have not written it, but somebody would have written it. This is the logic that they would have used. After the view has executed, now the view has gone back to the user. What do you do out here? That view that you had, the output that you had, you put that into the cache.
Okay.
You put that into the cache. And now the first hit has got over. First hit forced it to run out here. Next thing is, again, you do what? If in the in the first part, if it is already there in the cache, then do what?
Directly
Do
return.
what?
Directly
Then return it from the cache. Return the value from the cache itself. Then don't even go into what? Don't even go into the other part of forming the view. Don't do the executing and executed of the view at all. Are we getting this? So this is how it is actually internally doing it, which is why it needed to work with both. It needed the action, this thing, it needed the view filter, view this thing, as well as it needed the action filter and the view filter, both it needed. Because it's doing both on both it's writing. So this is an example of something like that, which is why I said that these two filters, the action and the result filters, these will be very closely working together. So like an example like this. Are we clear on this? Questions, if any? So just to summarize, what can we do? We can either use existing filters or we can create our own filters, right? We have used what? What are the examples that we use in this one? The first one that we tried was an example of an authorize this thing. So authorize is an example of an authorization filter. That is the first example that I tried. Make a note of these if you want to. In the final exam, these are the type of questions that could be asked. So authorize an example of the authorization filter. Then the second thing that we did out here was we created a where's it gone? We created an exception filter. So handle error is an example of a exception filter. I created my own exception filter by doing what? What did I do? I inherited from handle error. Okay. Where can we give a filter? Where can we set a filter? Where can we set this filter? First possibility is we can set it at the
Method level.
Method level,
at the action level. Second possibility at the
Controller level.
control level, or third possibility in the filter
Global.
config, where you can add it at the global level. The other filters that we tried out here were, we tried creating our own log filter, which inherited from action filter. We used the output cache, which is again an example of, actually these are both. It's an example of action filter as well as result filter. Okay, more result filter, because you're not giving out the result out here. You're writing your own code and giving some other result out, right? So these are things that we use. I'm moving away from this example. Anything that you'd like to ask about this? All right. Okay, now the next example is a little, heavy example in terms of what it does, but I'm going to show it to you in any case. We're going to talk about something called as an async controller, right? So far we have not created an async controller. We have created a regular controller. All controllers that we create right now, all the controllers that we are creating inherit from where? Inherit from which class? Controllers that we create inherit from which class?
Controller.
From the controller class. Now, consider this situation. Let me explain with an example and then I'll show you how the async controller works. Consider this situation. Let's say, I was creating, let's say like an aggregator type application. Okay. An aggregator application typically calls different services, and those different services return some data, and then you simply get the data from these different services and show it together. So if I was creating something like, let's say, makemytrip.com. Okay. Now the user wants to book a flight from, let's say, Mumbai to wherever. Let's say Mumbai to Delhi. Right? Now, MakeMyTrip does what? What does it do out here? All that it's doing is what? Getting results from different airlines and showing it to you all at one place. Then you can choose, okay, I want to make a booking on this airline, and then MakeMyTrip books it with that airline. So it's just basically a service provider, which is an aggregator. It's getting details from all airlines, putting them together, letting you choose, and then contacting that airline. I'm not going through such a complex example, but let's take the part where it has to get flights from Mumbai to Delhi. So where all is it going to call this? It's going to call, let's say, Air India, right? Indigo, okay, Vistara. Name me a couple of other airlines. Any other airlines?
SpiceJet.
SpiceJet, right? What else? Anything else?
Air
Hmm?
Asia.
Air
Air
Asia.
Asia.
Okay. So you got 5 different, airlines which you're getting it from. Okay. Now, to get the values, it will call some sort of service. So there might be some service which is returning it to you, returning on the data. Now, it could either be a web API, it could be a web service, right? It could be anything, any type of service that is returning you the data. Now, if you call these 5 different services, and if you're calling them, call me service 1. After service 1 is over, call me service 2. After service 2 is over, call me service 3. So get all flights from first airline, get all flights from second airline, get all flights from third airline. And like this, it was calling 5 methods. So let's say it was calling these 5 methods, which said get flights, right? And this is from 5 different airlines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's say each call took 10 seconds. Each call took 10 seconds. If you ran it synchronously, the total time that you will need to get this would be 50 seconds. Right? Now, instead of calling it synchronously, what would be a better way of calling any service? How do you, speed up your work out here?
Asynchronous call.
You make an
Asynchronous.
asynchronous call, right? And when you are now calling an asynchronous call, this method is returning a value. The problem that comes up is how do you get the return value? So when you making a call is not a problem, but getting the return value is a problem. At what point do you get the return value? What are the 2 ways that you have seen to get the return value from an asynchronous call? First way was using delegates, right? Delegates had a callback function. So the callback function will tell you when that method is ready to return the data. That's the first possibility. Second possibility we use tasks. And with tasks, you could call it with await. But await again is like a synchronous call. Meaning what? What are you doing with the synchronous call with await? You're awaiting the method to return some data. So for example, if let's say one method took 45 seconds and the other methods took 3 seconds each. And if the method that you're waiting for first was the 45-second one, then unless you finish the 45-second one, the others will not be able to get in the return values from it. Ideally, what would you want to do? You would want to get it from the shorter ones first. But how do you know which one is shorter? You don't know which one is shorter. So if you end up calling the longer one first, all the others are now held back in queue because you're just awaiting that. So typically, if you can call it with delegates, then that would be a better option for you, because then the callback function, you're not like waiting. You're not waiting. You're doing what? Okay, when it comes back, I will get it. Are you clear on this? So I want to make an async call. And I want to make an async call from my ASP.NET MVC application, let's say. Okay. I want to make an async call from my ASP.NET MVC application. Now, to make an async call from your ASP.NET MVC application, you will need to use an async controller. So the async controller will come into play if from your ASP.NET MVC application, you're calling other methods asynchronously. Right? And when this happens, it works in a slightly different way. So the whole mechanism of working is slightly different, and this method is more suited for making async calls. So that's what we are trying to do out here. So assuming I had to call these multiple methods, what am I going to do? I'm going to call services asynchronously. So not wait for one to finish and the other to then take over. They will run in parallel. And if let's say, now I'll give you the same situation. Let's say if each of these methods took 10 seconds to run, with a synchronous call, this will run 50 seconds. With an async call, how many seconds will this take for me to get values from all methods?
10.
Would be, yes, would be equal to the maximum time taken by any one of these methods. So that is what we are trying to do out here. Now, in my example here, I have created an async WCF service, right? Which is something that we sort of breezed through the other day. We were like, you all had a long day session. We sort of just did a demo of that. We're not really taking this up. So I'm showing you this, and you can substitute it later with any other service call or with any other call. But my focus is not on the WCF service. My focus is on the call to that WCF service. So even though I'm calling the WCF service, and you might be wondering, so why are we creating this WCF service? We are not very comfortable with it. Ignore the WCF service. I'm not asking you to focus on the WCF service. I'm asking you to focus on the call to it as to how it's being called. Okay. So let me take you through this service itself. The service that I'm creating has just one method called do work. That's the service that I'm calling. It is having a method here called do work. Okay. This do work method that you're written down code for is returning a simple hello world. But the not so simple thing here is what it's doing so after 5 seconds. So it's a 5-second delay, and then I'm calling hello world. All right. So this is returning a string, simple return of a string. Okay. I am calling this in a synchronous manner. I call this in a synchronous manner. If I call it in a synchronous manner, total time taken would be 5 plus 5 seconds. Total time taken would be 5 seconds plus 5 seconds, total of 10 seconds. I mean, 2 calls I'm making. It might actually be little more than 10. It might be 11, 12 seconds because there'll be an overhead of actually getting the value and showing the value. So this is what I'm showing you right now. So this is a synchronous call. So what if I was calling it in a synchronous manner? Right? That is the first thing that I'm doing. The second thing I'll try to do is I will try to call it in an asynchronous manner from a synchronous page. So first I will call it in a synchronous manner from a synchronous page. Time will be maximum. Then I will try calling it from an async manner from a synchronous, from a regular controller, synchronous controller. And you'll find that it gives you a problem. And then the hero will come rushing in, which is what are we building this example towards? In this situation now, we will need to have an async controller, which will work the best way. So this is what I'm trying to show you. Right? When I'm running the project, I want the service also to run, and I want my controller also to run. So if you look at the properties out here, I've got multiple projects starting off. What are the first projects starting off? First project starting off is the service. And the second project starting off is the client, which is the async controller. Now you can change the order. You can, change what it needs to do, but I'm starting the service followed by the controller. Okay. Ignore the service, focus on the controller. Clear? Let's try running this. Now in the controller also, I'm running the home controller first, which has this index. And let's try running this. So this is the service starting off. Ignore that part of the, the UI. And this is the actual code running. And it takes about 10 seconds for it to run. Right. All right. So look at the call out here. Result one was from the first service. Now both services gave me hello world. I didn't change the code in there, but both services gave me what? Hello world. The before time was about 6:3 and 18 seconds. The after time was 6:3 and 28 seconds. So what I got was the total time taken was about 10 point something seconds it would have taken. Are you clear on this, everybody? This is calling it synchronously. Two methods I had called. If I had called 3 methods, it would have been 15 seconds, 4 methods, 20 seconds, and so on and so forth. Clear? Clear with the first output? Okay. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to be trying to do I'm trying to get a little smart out here. I'm saying instead of calling it synchronously, I will try calling it asynchronously. I'll call it asynchronously. So how is this going to be working? How is this service going to be called asynchronously? See what it does. I'm calling a method here in an async manner. I'm calling it in an async manner. And when this function gets over, I will call do completed. So do completed is actually an event. All right. And when this function is over, then that's when this would fire off, where I get the result. So I'm now trying to be a little smart. I'm saying, okay, I will now try to call it async. Now I'm still not calling second method. I'll tell you why I'm not calling the second. But I'm trying to call it now, instead of calling it in a synchronous manner, I'm trying to call it in an async manner. The moment I try to do this, the moment I try to call it in an async manner, see what it does for me. All right. It says invalid operation exception. So it's saying basically you can't call code from, you can't call async code from a synchronous controller. So it didn't allow me to do this. Are you getting how I'm building up to it? I first started off by saying that I'm doing it first with synchronous code. That worked, but that's very long. So I'm now trying to do async code. Async code cannot be called this way. So what are they saying? Invalid operation cannot work. What do you need to do? This code was okay. This code was okay. This code was not a problem. This code was a problem. They're saying, please use it in an async controller only. And this is what I've done in the other one. So here is my async controller. The first thing that the async controller does is it inherits from, my default controller inherits from an async controller. And normally you have a method here called index, right? Every method that you write, let's say if you had a method called X, the method was X. Here you have two methods, X async and X completed. So if my method was index, now I've got this as two methods. What are the two methods now? Index async and index completed. All right. These are the two methods that I'm writing. Now, when I try to hit index, if I go to default/index, in my URL, it automatically goes and calls the index async. All right. So this index async is automatically called. I'll repeat. When would this index async be called? When in your URL, if you hit index, internally this index is going to be calling index async. Now, why is this being called? Who's doing this for you? This is the async controller at play. This is not the regular controller. This is an async controller. So index async is the one that is calling it in asynchronous manner. So here is where you start your whatever methods that you wanted to call in an asynchronous manner. So what are we doing here in this case? We are saying I will now call that web service, but I will call it in an asynchronous manner. I'm calling it twice. I'm making two calls to it. So you see this service client, O1 and service client O2. So I'm calling two methods here. I'm calling first one in async, second one also in an async. So this is where you started. Now, what are the biggest problem that we are faced with when we were trying to call asynchronous code? The problem was that how do we know when this gets over? And then you have to keep waiting. So to keep track of this, every time you call an asynchronous operation, you add one to a counter. So you have something called as an async manager. And the async manager is helping you keep track of your async operations. So what are we saying here? We are saying I'm calling a method in an asynchronous manner and I'm adding one to the count. I'm saying now, supposing I have to ask one of you to do this. All right. The only one, I think everybody is running away. Kaustubh is the only one who's kept his video on. All right. So let's say Kaustubh, I'm telling. Okay, Kaustubh, keep track. Okay. I'm calling method one. Kaustubh, add one in your mind. Add one in your mind. Okay, you can show me the number of fingers. So you show how many fingers you have there. So I've called the first method. Okay, I've called now Air India. So how many have I called, Kaustubh? One. Okay, Kaustubh, I'm going to call one more now. I'm calling whatever, SpiceJet. So Kaustubh, how many calls have I made now? I'm incrementing here. 2. Right? Similarly, now I don't have that. I don't have 5 calls here. Let's say I'm calling Vistara. Now, Kaustubh, I have called Vistara. Please increment. So how many calls do we have here? 3. So Kaustubh is my async manager. All right. Every time I make a call, what am I telling Kaustubh? Kaustubh, keep track of this. Okay. I've made one more call like that. Now, Kaustubh, I make a 4th call. Who was this now? I forgot which was the airline, but Air Asia, let's say. So Kaustubh, I'm calling one more method. Keep track. 4. Now, in the meanwhile, while I'm calling these, Kaustubh is adding one to it. In the meanwhile, one of the methods completed. Which was the method that was completed? Let's say Air India completed. So if Air India completed, I am telling Kaustubh, I've got the values back from Air India. So decrement and reduce the count by 1. Let's say the second one returned. Let's say Air Asia returned. Kaustubh, I've got the values from Air Asia. Please decrement. Now how many? Now can I send the result back? Kaustubh says no, you can't send. I've got still what? 2 methods are yet to return. So I can't let you return it. So I'm saying, okay, I'll wait. So now Kaustubh, the third one came back to me. So please remove that one. Yeah. Thank you for closing that finger, not the other one. Okay. And finally, Kaustubh, we got the last one back. So what has happened now? He was my async manager. Now the count has become 0. Now I know that whatever methods I've called are over, have returned the value to me. Now, whatever methods were being called, the value that I was returning, I was doing whatever I wanted to with the value. I was getting the result and I was doing whatever I wanted to with the result. So I have now finished processing my page. Now, after I finish processing my page, when the decrement becomes, when the decrement calls it and then the count becomes 0, then automatically, internally, the async manager, async controller will automatically go and call index completed. Will automatically call index completed. And in index completed, what am I doing now? What am I doing here in this case? I am returning the view. So all this while, I was not returning the view. I was not returning the view. Why? Because my async manager still had something pending. The outstanding operations were still pending. And that is what this is doing for me. So essentially, it's like a counter. Every time you add an async operation here, every time you add one here, what will it do? It will add one to the counter. And every time your method returns a value, you decrement it. So when do you know when to send back the values? When the count becomes 0. And when the count becomes 0, the index completed is all automatically. So now let's see the same method. Now I'm calling these two methods, right? I'm calling two things. Earlier, it took me 10 seconds to do that. In the first example, it took me 10 seconds to do that. Now I'm doing the same code, but this time I'm doing it with the default controller, which inherits from async controller. And let's do this. Now, if you notice, I am not calling default controller what methods? Index async and index completed. I'm not calling index async. What am I calling in my URL? What am I calling? Index. And async controller is automatically converting into index async or index completed. That is how it's automatically working. So all this code now would be handled by the async controller. So let's run this. And same code down. What I'm trying to show you here is actually taking 5 seconds. Right? So the two methods were called, and the before time this time was 6:14:30 and after time was 6:14:35. So in 5 seconds I completed it. Now if I add 10 method calls, synchronous code will take 10 into 5, 50 seconds. Async code will still be 5 seconds. Okay, so that's the best part of using an async controller. Questions, if any? So you can try this example in the lab. All right. While trying it out, what are you going to change? Change the root. If you use the home controller is using synchronous code. The default controller is using asynchronous code. Okay. And this is the service that I had written down on the other. Questions, if any? All right. So I'm moving away from async controllers and I'm going to try out one more example here. We're going to talk about something called as bundling and minification. Okay. Okay, the same link that I have opened, I put in the chat window as well. Now, when you're running your, website, there are a lot of sort of files that are actually created here for you. So if you just go through some of these files, you'll find that you have different content files, right? Different script files. You might have different images, right? Different, options which are being there. And every time in your, if you take up, for example, if you take up a layout, okay, every time in the layout, if it has something like this, when it has an entry like this, script source equal to, for example, what does the browser actually do? What does the browser actually do when it reaches this entry? Yes. What does it actually do?
So try to find that particular JS file in the root directory.
And what does it do? It actually downloads that file.
Okay.
So the browser, when you hit a entry like this, script source equal to so and so, the browser will actually try to download that file. Okay. Now, if the browser has visited a site before, then it will not download it again. So that part it takes care. But first time that it's visiting your site, it's actually downloading that file. So at a given point of time, the browser is not just downloading your view, but along with the view, the browser has multiple threads that are open that are downloading all the script files that you have mentioned out here. So whatever code that you're using, script files, CSS files, external, .jpeg files, whatever else that you have out here, all of those are being downloaded by the browser simultaneously in different threads. But there's a limit to the number of threads that the browser can open. Okay. So especially, for example, if the user is actually browsing multiple sites at the same time and he's opened different windows, the browser may not be downloading only your files. It might be downloading other files also. And the number of threads that it can open are limited. Generally, it's between 7 to 12, right? On an average for the browser. So which means, for example, let's say if you have more than 15, 20 such files, 15, 20 script files, for example, or whatever, CSS files and other files. And if the browser has only, let's say, a way of downloading 10 at a time, and you have 20, so what would happen now? How would it now work? You have to, you've got 20 files that need to be downloaded, but browser can open only 10 threads at one time. Then what will it do? Then what will it do? Yes.
So the tasks will be queued.
Correct. So unless it finishes the first one, unless it finishes downloading the first file, it won't start off the next file. Okay. Now, to make the browser download the files that you need more efficiently, what you can do is you can use a concept called as bundling. What bundling simply does is files, instead of having multiple files, you are putting them together into one bundle. So when he wants to download it, suppose you're putting 5 files together into one bundle. So instead of having to download 5 files in 5 separate threads, he's downloading it only in a single thread. Are you getting it? So you're reducing the number of concurrent threads that the browser needs to open to download your files. And there is a performance benefit in that. Are you clear on this, everybody? So your site would work faster, would load faster because the browser doesn't have to download multiple such files which it has to then queue out here. So that's typically what bundling does. Put the files together into a bundle. Now that's one aspect of how you can optimize it. The second concept that is generally talked together out here is minification. So what do you mean by minification? Now, if you look at this file, for example, bootstrap.theme.css, right? Bootstrap.theme.css. If I open it, it gives me nice comments out here. And it's very readable and very easy to understand, or easier to understand with comments and with all of these things out here. Okay, especially let's say if you open one of the jQuery files, then you'll get those even more. But if you open the same file, which is a minimized file, minified file, you'll find that this is the same file, right? But see how this is looking. So if you look at this, what was the start point here? These are the buttons that it was using. And if you look at the minified file for this one, it is actually, put everything on one line. I don't know if you can, scroll right up to the end and see it, but all of this is on one line itself, right? So it's removed all the extra formatting. What are the extra formatting? The white spaces, all right? Comments. So for running that code, you don't need the full file with comments, with spacing and all that. You need the minified file, right? So here also, if you're in the debug mode, while you're in the debug mode, maybe your script files and other things, you need to see them in the larger format. But when you want to download it onto the browser, to make it more efficient, you can give him the minified file. And the minified file would be much shorter, much smaller compared to the larger file which contains all extra comments and whatnot. All right. Now, bundling and minification mainly come into effect, or mainly come into, you think about them when you want to deploy your site. So when you're in the development mode, then you don't need bundling and minification to occur. You don't need that. But when you're about to deploy the site, at that time, it makes difference. So what I want to do is, while I'm in my development mode, I want to use the large file because it makes no difference to me as a developer. But when I'm ready to deploy my site, I want to enable bundling and minification. Right? Now, this article that I've shared with you, it just firstly talks about how these different threads are being created, and they're showing you what is happening out there, and how bundling will reduce the size of the the bundles that are going out. So instead of multiple files, you're putting the files together into one bundle. All right. Minification, again, what they've given you, what they're saying, okay, this was your actual file with all longer this thing, and this is the minified version of that file, which is actually much smaller and shorter. Okay, so these are the things that they're first talking about. And then what are the impact of bundling and minification? So with certain performance tests, how the amount of KB and the time, load times and all of that has been drastically reduced. So without using this file, without bundling and minification, it was this size, and then with bundling and minification, it was this size and whatnot. Okay, and then the time taken to load it, and then the time using bundling and minification, this is what it was. Are we clear on this, everybody? So this is what you're actually getting. There is showing you options of doing that. Okay, now how do you control bundling and minification? There are two ways. First is in your web.config. In the web.config, there's an entry for compilation. And if you said debug equal to true, when do you need debugging? When do you need debugging? When we are in the
Development mode.
Development mode. So keep this on, keep this debug equal to true on when you're in the development mode, and make this equal to false when you are in what? In the deployment mode. So when you're ready to deploy, what do you do here? You just set this entry to false. And when you set this entry to false, automatically bundling and minification would be enabled. Are we clear on this? Automatically bundling and minification would be enabled for you. So this is what we have. So this is one way. Where are we doing this? In which file? In the web.config. There's a sure shot question coming up for this in your module end exam. The 1 mark giveaway, 1 mark present, Independence Day present from me to you, saying that this is the question that's going to be asked. All right. The second way of doing this is if you look at that bundleconfig.cs file, bundleconfig.cs file, you remember that you have these different files in the app_start folder. So rootconfig.cs, filterconfig.cs, and bundleconfig.cs. So in the bundleconfig.cs file, all that you do is what? You set this to true. Bundle table.enable optimizations to true. So if you don't want to do it in the web.config, you can do it out here. Okay. So this is the other entry that you would do it in the bundleconfig.cs file. Are we clear on this? And this will override the entry in the web.config. So again, one of these two will be definitely asked. Are we clear on this? Okay, if you open that bundle config itself, all right, there'll be an entry like this. So what do you think it's doing out here? What do you think it's creating out here? What is this line creating? The highlighted line. What is this creating? Bundles.add new script bundle. So this is the bundle it's creating. It's calling the bundle name as jQuery. And it's including what files? Including what files? jQuery-version.js. So all the jQuery files, whatever the files are there, would be included out here into one file called jQuery. So what has it done? If you had 5 files for jQuery, those have been put together into one bundle. So open your bundleconfig.cs file, any project of yours, any ASP.NET MVC web project, and see the entries in this register bundles in the bundle config file. So they have already created few bundles for you, and that's how you can create your own bundles. Are we clear? And then concept is, it took a long time to explain, but the way of doing it is very simple. All that you do is what? Either compilation debug equal to false or bundle table.enable optimizations equal to true. Set one of these two. The second one overrides the first. Question if any. Questions if any. On bundling and minification. Yes. All right. So that is another thing that I want to talk about. Okay. I'll need some time more. I want to, I know I had a 2-hour session planned, but today is the last day that I've been allowed to meet you all. They have told me no more. You're not allowed into CDAC any time after this. So I need to finish off a few more things. With your permission, I'll just continue without a break. Otherwise, if there's a break again, there's a break of flow. I don't know how many of you will come back also. So we can take a quick 2-minute break. If you want a quick 2-minute bathroom break, we can do that. I'll have a glass of water. But other than that, I'm not giving you a break as such. If you do want to take a quick washroom break or whatever, 2 minutes is all that I'm giving. Right? Any questions in the meanwhile? You are free to ask. All right, so let's take it forward from there. Hopefully, people are back if at all they were out. The next, and in fact, this is the last topic that I would be covering with you all here, is a quick intro to ASP.NET MVC core. So we have been only working with .NET framework related projects out here. From a coding perspective, from the things that you did in, let's say, C++, C#, and we tried them with framework. All the code that you wrote there will work in .NET Core. So it's not that whatever we've done will not work in .NET Core. So whatever you've done in .NET Framework will work in .NET Core. One difference, and I've already told you this when we're doing this, is the only thing that we have done which will not work in .NET Core is delegate.beginInvoke. Right? When we're talking about threading, .NET Core does not support that, the async code with delegates. So, of course, it has delegates, but not the async code with delegates. So what is the preferred way of doing it in .NET Core would be with using tasks. And that is the standard way of doing it out here. Okay. So that was one thing that I can think of, which I know for sure will not work. Other than that, no major things, if at all minor syntaxes here and there, but 99% of the code that you're written in .NET Framework will also work with .NET Core. Okay.
WCF.
Now, yes.
So you have told while teaching WCF that it doesn't work on
WCF doesn't at all. The whole WCF topic does not. WCF in .NET Core, there is an asterisk again next to it, which is I've given you the simple way and said that no. So there is an option of making some part of WCF work in .NET Core by adding certain extra libraries and whatnot, but that is still in the experimental stage. At this stage, it is still not fully functional. So there is work going on, and maybe in a year or 2 years, maybe when .NET 7 release. .NET 7, by the way, will release in the next few months. All right. So they're anticipating a November release, but there's also buzz going on that it might be delayed a little bit. So in the next maybe year or so, maybe they may get WCF functional. But at this point, all features of WCF are not working out here. So you would preferred option here would be Web API. Web API works. Whatever you're doing in Web API is also working out here. Now in .NET Core, the ASP.NET MVC core, right? The concepts are very, very similar. So again, here what the concept of a controller, the pattern of model, view, and controller, those things are exactly, those are not changing. But what has changed tremendously is the configuration aspect. So how you enable certain components, how you use certain components, that has changed. In .NET Framework, most of the things that you're doing are available to you on your machine itself. The libraries are installed on your machine itself. In .NET Core, these libraries are not there by default. You have to do a NuGet to get the library. So using the NuGet package manager, you have to install the library. So now they have made it very, flexible. Like you don't have to have all libraries. You can install only the libraries that you need. And in .NET Core, one different concept that you will be exposed to would be to creating a middleware. So you didn't have this concept, or you had it in a different way in framework, but in .NET Core, you would be exposed to this concept of a middleware. So typically, what is middleware? If you have to explain this in one line, the software or the applications that sit between the server and your application are called as middleware. They're literally in the middle. Between what? Between the server that is hosting your application and your application that is running. So between the two, it's like a pipeline. Okay, the term here uses it's a middleware pipeline. So whatever applications are required by your application, you have to set them up as middleware. Okay. Now this middleware, there is a default middleware given to you, and you can also configure it and add your own applications to that middleware. But the middleware is basically the pipeline between the server and your application. Okay. Now, at this stage, you don't need to worry about configuring middleware. You don't need to. But there are a lot of options available which you can customize and use and work with. Okay. Now, middleware itself will require certain software to work. Now, this software that you need out here in your application can also be configured through the use of services. So all software will not be available in the middleware. There might be some software available as services. So middleware and services are two things that you'd be using. Both are software. Middleware comes in before your application starts. So there's a pipeline through which it goes and works with that. Okay. If you are, let's create a MVC application. Let me open it so I can show you what exactly is happening there. So when you open this ASP.NET Core MVC app, all right. Okay. The first thing is when you open this, right, again, it will prompt you for HTTPS. I'm deselecting that. And when I create it, so certain sections will be very much similar to what you've done in framework. If you can see the section on the right hand side, what are the things that are absolutely the same? Nothing has changed there. Those three folders that you can see, what are the three folders for? Yeah.
Model view control.
Controllers, models,
Controls, models, and views.
control.
So those would not change. That part has, thankfully remained the same. So as I said, your code is not going to change. The way in which you write your model will remain the same. The way in which you write your controller will remain the same. The way in which you write your view will remain the same. Nothing will change in there. Okay. Few other things have changed. The dependencies. So you don't have the references. Instead, you have the dependencies. And in the dependencies, all the files that you require for, ASP.NET Core application. Now, all of these files, these are included by default. Okay. These are the ones that are included by default. So, you won't be adding references here. Instead, whatever applications you want, how do you add them? You'll add them through NuGet. So no references to be added. Whatever you need to add them through NuGet. Okay. If it's a project that you're creating, if it's another project that you're creating, then that project you add as a reference. Why project as a reference and other applications as NuGet? Why project as a reference? Suppose I'm creating a class library, and if I have to include that, I have to add it as a reference. But why others as NuGet? What is the reason for that? Because those libraries are not there on your system. They have to be downloaded from the internet. So whatever you need to download from the internet, you'll be doing a NuGet. On the other hand, if your own project is there, it's there on your system. There you add a reference. All right. Now the files that you had earlier, like for example, we saw web.config right now. That web.config has been entirely done away with, and you have this app settings.json. So for example, now the connection string that I had given, I had to give that in web.config. Now, instead of giving that in web.config, now you're giving this in app settings.json. So this is a file that has changed from an XML file to a JSON file. So entirely different. Settings are entirely different. There's nothing that I can even remotely say would be similar out here. The second thing that you would see out here is that it's added these files program.cs. And if you look at program.cs, the main function is calling a create host builder, right? And doing a .build and then doing a .run on that. The create host builder, this method is calling a host. Here in this case, this is your IIS host .create default builder, and along with this, it's saying use this startup file. So this is what it's actually doing. It's actually running the code out here. This is the startup point, and the settings for all your application are given in the startup application. So here is where you have to configure all your services that you need. So let me take you to the startup CS. This is where you are doing all the configuration. What do you see here? What are the first thing that you see here? Public startup. What is that? Class is startup. Method name is startup. What is that?
Constructor.
Your constructor. Now, one of the things that would be different out here is that it uses the inversion of control design pattern. And inversion of control design pattern can be done in different ways. Here it is using something called as dependency injection. So dependency injection is an example of the IOC pattern. So what do you mean by dependency injection? If your class, in this case, my class is startup. If your class needs to create some object, now there are two ways in which it can be done. Either the class itself can say that I want to create an object of something else. I want to use this resource. I want to use this option. It can either do that. That is one possibility. Or the second possibility is somebody else can inject this data into your class. Right? So either you create an object yourself saying that this is the object that I want to create. Supposing my class needs some other thing. Let's say it needs a connection. What do I need to connect? I need to connect to a database. So one possibility is I write down the code to connect. I write down the code to create a connection. One possibility. Second possibility, somebody else creates a connection object and passes it to me. And then I use this connection object. So now this somebody else creating the connection object and passing it to me is an example of inversion of control, where I am not creating it myself. I need it. Who needs it? I need it. My class needs it. But my class will not do it. Somebody else is creating it. Right? So there's a dependency created based on someone else. Now this type of code of, which uses inversion of control is useful if you want to write what is known as test-driven development. If you wanted to check out, if you wanted some testing engine to check out whether your code is working correctly or not, this is one of the important ways of doing this. All right. And that is the approach that is used in .NET Core. So here, the configuration for this class is being sent to you. Now, where is this being sent from? Who's creating an object of the startup class? Where is that getting created from? That is happening here in the program class. So the program class, when it says use startup, is passing this information to the startup. What information? About what? About the configuration of the project. Right? About the configuration of the project. And this configuration of the project is being read from the app settings.json file. So somebody else is sending me configuration information which I'm using out here in my code. And whatever configuration that I need to do, one is in the startup, I received this. Secondly, there is a configure services and a configure method. Now these are being called, if you notice, it's showing you that this method is being called by the runtime. So nobody is calling it. The runtime is the one who's calling this method. So the runtime is creating an object of the startup class, passing it configuration information and calling these methods for configure services and configure. So all services that you need to be configured out here. To give you a simple example, if you want to use entity framework, you need to put in the configuration settings here. If you need to use even session management, if you want to use sessions, the code to configure the session needs to be put in first. So you need to configure the services. The services will not be automatically assigned available to you. You have to say, I want this service, I want to configure this, these are the options out here. And this is how we'll be working with this. To give you an example, let me just show you one. I have one project that I have opened out here. All right. So this is what was the default option. This is what was the default option. So what are the only line that we had there? This is what I was showing you. What are the only line we had there? Services dot add controllers with views. Now, in addition to this, I also have to enable my sessions. And unless I enable my sessions, I will not be able to use them in my code. Right? So what is this now an example of one such service that I need to configure? One such. Like this, whatever services you need will have to be one by one given out here. So you first add the session, which is adding the service, and then later you write a line here which says that please use the session. So add the session here, that's adding the service, and then the configure method is actually going and adding this. So what all is it saying? It's saying that use exception handling, use static files. Static files are these files and under www root. So the .cs files, .js files, all of these. Okay, use routing, use sessions, use authorization. So all of these services need to be turned on. They will not be, switched on by default. So this is what I just wanted to show you one example of a how you would need to write code to configure this. Are we clear on this, everybody? All right. So like this, going back to that empty project, one of the options here, this is changed now. There's no longer that root config.cs. So for example, the pattern for the root is being given out here. What are they saying now? Controller. And what is the default value for the controller? Is home and action, and the default value is index and the ID question mark. So what does the ID question mark would mean? What? Question mark would imply what? Yeah. When do you give question mark?
Nullable type.
Nullable. So even if you don't pass anything, it will still work. So this is how they have specified the pattern. So you'll find that the configuration has changed slightly, not so much the code. Okay. So these would be what you'd be giving. Now it has already generated a controller for you, right? And do you see the slight difference here? Slight difference here. What does it return? What does it return? Yeah. Earlier you had what? Action result. Now there's one more interface here called iAction result. And if you look at the action result class, I can write down code like this also, by the way. Even this will work if what you did earlier. The action result class actually implements iAction result. So instead of using the class name, they're giving the interface name out here. And that still allows you to work with any of the action results that you know of. Okay. So the controller is the same way. The structure for this will be same. So views, in this case, it has got home and then index and privacy. All right. I don't have a model, or they have a model out here, but it's same thing. It's a class. So this will not change at all. Whatever you've done earlier, same things will work here. So that's the good news for you. I mean, from a coding perspective, nothing has changed. Only thing is what has changed is what drastically changed is the configuration options. Too many to explain in one session, but this is what you would have to look out for. Now, the good news is that you don't need to do a lot of this in any case. I mean, a lot of times when you have to use that service, there'll be a lot of options available on the net or whatever. If you just search, okay, how do I use sessions? How do I use entity framework? They'll give you all these options to you to use in any case. So it's not going to be very difficult. I'll also give you a small tutorial for you all to try out, where you can try out at your own pace. Maybe you can do it after the exam ends. Okay, don't do it before the exam, do it after the exam, where you can then get a little more comfortable in trying out things. Or if you're interested, you can try it out before the exam. All right. So if you run the home controller right now, that is the default method. The index is going to run, and this is the code in the index that is actually going to run. So let me just run the core example and show you quickly. Okay, this is like a hello world type thing that you know how to work with this. No big deal in doing this. Right. So this is the default page, and you can try creating your own controllers, views, and models out here. It will work the same way. Okay. Okay, good. I opened that state management example. I wanted to show you this also. From a state management perspective, what are the things that you learned about? You learned about view bag, view data, temp data, session variables, cookies. Cookies code is quite different here. So look up the code for how cookies would work. But you work with these other variables. Those things have not changed. Okay. So for example, if you wanted to store something to view data, or if you wanted to store something to view bag, okay, that is exactly the same as before. So you still have the view bag, you still have the view data. One change that has happened here is in the sessions. See how I'm setting a value. So to create a session variable, the syntax is drastically different. So I'm going to share this one with you. So this is the code to create a session. What are the two things it's creating out here? What are the two things it's allowing you to create? One is what? First one is, what is this one?
Integer.
Putting in an integer value. The second one is a string value. The only two things that you can put into a session this thing are either integer or string with a set so and so. The third option which you had with set requires you to convert it to a byte array. So where else had we seen where you can convert it to a byte array? Somewhere else if we had seen this. Where else could you convert something? We tried something. Sorry?
Serialization.
We had actually tried converting it to a byte array in the files example.
Files. Yeah, right. Sorry. Files.
Okay. So while working with files and we are writing, raw data into a file, So there was an encoding class which we are using to call the method out there. Now this is a very difficult way of doing it. To convert everything into a set of bytes is not the easiest possible way. So generally what is done is this. If you want to store integer values, you can store integer values. If you want to store string values, you can store string values. No problem there, absolutely. Now, what if you want to store an object? Let's say I want to store an employee object out there. So typically what you can do is you can serialize this employee object into a string. Right? Why am I asking you to serialize it to a string? Because what does a session variable allow you to store out here? Two possibilities are what? Either int data or string data. So if you can take your object and you can serialize it to a string, and then while reading it, if you can deserialize it again, then your job is half done. In addition to serializing to a string, in this example, what am I serializing it to? What am I serializing it to?
JSON.
Yeah. So I'm using a class called JSON convert. So newtonsoft.json.json converts. There's a NuGet on newtonsoft.json that I've done out here. And this will serialize it into a JSON string. So my object gets serialized into a JSON string. Once I've got that, to read the value, what will I need to do? This is just storing the value. So I got an employee object, and the employee object, I'm serializing it out here into JSON listing. What next now? What next? Yes. Reverse process.
Parsing.
Deserialize.
I mean that.
Right. So all that we do here is what? We deserialize it. So later, what do you do? If you want to get that employee object back, you deserialize it from the session variable. So I'm storing into a session variable here called D. I'm storing into a session variable called D in a serialized format. And here I'm getting the employee object back from that session variable by deserializing it. So this is the roundabout way of doing this. Now for working with this, I have done a NuGet on these two things. So why have I done a NuGet on newtonsoft.json? Why NuGet on newtonsoft.json? Yes. Because I'm calling what? Calling JSON convert out here. So this is a class in that library. Second thing is, actually this gets installed on its own. Okay. So you don't need to do a NuGet on it, but sometimes it does not. So just to be doubly sure, you just do a NuGet on this. By default, it should get installed. But if it doesn't, just do a NuGet on this. Why have I done this? What am I doing out here? I am using sessions. For using sessions, what are the prerequisite? Your sessions need to be enabled. So I have done so by going into the configure services in my startup and enabling sessions. This is the default option here. Can you figure out what this is doing? Add session with options. What is this doing here?
Set timeout.
Setting a timeout of 20 minutes. So this is doing it with the default options. This is doing it with the options that you require out here. Additionally, I need to also write a use sessions option out here. So I'll share this file with you just to show you how this can be done. But idea is to just expose you that code will be slightly different here in this case. Okay. So this was the biggest change sort of in terms of session management, state management that you saw out here. Okay. As regards databases, what are the two approaches that we used when we're doing databases? What are the two ways in which we could contact or work with data? First way, if you are to connect to a database, what is the first way you connect it? Yes. How did you connect to the database? No. Temporary memory.
SQL command.
So SQL command was under what? You're correct. Okay. Under first thing you did was what? SQL connection.
Yes, SQL.
Then SQL command, and then of course SQL data reader or any of the other classes. Now these were available to you in system.data.sql client, right? This is the library that you're using. Now this library works only in .NET framework. This works only in .NET framework. So if you had to work in .NET Core, instead of system.data.sql client, use Microsoft.data.sql client. And this will work for both. This will work for .NET Core as well as for .NET framework. Okay. There is no change in the code that you will write. Only the name of the library is different. The code that you have written with system.data.sql client is fully compatible with the code that you're writing with Microsoft.data.sql client. But the change is you'll have to use Microsoft.data.sql client. Every time you have to include this library in .NET framework, what did you need to do? You needed to add a reference, right? In here, what will you need to do? In here, what will you need to do?
NuGet.
For .NET, you'll need to do a NuGet. So you'll have to start off by doing a NuGet on Microsoft.data.sql client. Right? Once you have that, rest of the code is exactly the same. No changes. So can I suggest one thing? You can make a note of this. Can you all try, the MVC example for connecting to a database, this time using Microsoft.data.sql client. You will write identical code. No changes in the code. The way in which you will do scaffolding will also be the same. Everything will be the same. No changes there. All right. So just as your practice, do it with this. Okay. So this was one way of data access. What is the other way?
Entity framework.
Entity framework. All right. So the entity framework has changed entirely. Change entirely meaning the library has changed. So now it is entity framework core. So to begin with, you'll have to start off with doing a NuGet on entity framework core. Right? Entity framework core would be the way in which you would do your NuGet. In entity framework core, all right, in entity framework core, if you're working with .NET Core or if you're working with .NET 5, right, make a note of these two because you might get small stupid silly errors because of this. For .NET Core 5, you will use entity framework Core 5. So pick up the latest version of entity framework Core 5 for .NET Core 5. And for .NET Core 6, pick up the latest version of the entity framework Core 6. So that's the one change that you'll have to think about while working with this. Okay. All right. Now I am going to give you a quick demo on doing an application with Entity Framework Core 6, Entity Framework Core 5. All right. And to do that, I have given you all a set of instructions out here which you can follow. Okay. I've given a set of instructions that you can follow. First thing is we'll try out the DB first approach. So in the DB first approach, what is to be done? So I'll just take you through the steps. I'm going to share this file with you. Okay. I'll explain the steps and then you do the same. I mean, I will do the same thing out here in the demo that I'm showing you. First step, DB first approach, starting off with adding NuGet packages for these. All right, adding NuGet packages for these. So first one is which one? Entity Framework Core. Right, Entity Framework Core. That is the first package you'll add. Now there are two. Now this is the package that you need for your coding. But there are two others that you're going to be adding, and let's see why you need these two others. If you're using the DB first approach, what is the first thing that you need to do? What is the first thing that you need to do? Forget about looking at this thing out here. Normally, what would you first do? There you would, in your .NET framework, you needed to add those classes which are generated from the database. And to do that, you had a utility for doing it. You had a, you could say in the project menu, add an item. And you have to add that entity model. And the entity model generated all that code for you. So that is what you did in framework. The end result is the same, but the way in which you will do this is through the command line. So after adding the NuGet packages, at the package manager console, you will run a command called scaffold db context. And this scaffold db context would create all the classes for you. What classes will it create? It will create the, supposing you have got department and employee tables. So it will add those tables and it will also create a DB context for you. Now this scaffold DB context, is available in this package. So because you need the scaffold DB context, we need this package. And this package makes a reference to this package. So internally it's making a reference to this package. And therefore you also need this package. Are you clear? So this is the DB first. So you'll have to do this through a command line, command out here. Once you're finished doing this, now what? We have finished adding the classes. Before you can use the controller, before you can do anything else, you need to specify the entity framework core service in startup.cs. So this is what you're doing out here. You're specifying the service. Okay, we'll see what are the options to add. We'll see that. So you specify that service there. And you also specify the connection string in the app settings.json file. So this is all this that you do first. A lot of the things that were being automatically done for you are now being shifted to you. So you have to do it. So it's doing similar to what it did earlier, but with a slightly different approach. Are we clear on this? So I'm going to share this file with you and we'll see how we could actually go ahead and do this. So I'm going to copy this at this point itself. I'll copy it. And if you can keep up, then great. So these are the 4 steps that we had out there. I'll also share this file at the end of the session, but you can, while I'm doing it, you can do it with me. Okay. I'll just go in for a new project. I'll just go in for a new project. And you all can do this simultaneously. Create a new project. ASP.NET Core web app, which shows you model view controller. Right. And I'm calling it EF Core DB first. Okay. Don't configure for HTTPS and create this. You all can actually, if you all are already ahead of me in the project, you can start off by adding those NuGet packages. So first step was to add the NuGet packages.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, in target framework, I have only a single option of 3.1. That is long-term support.
Okay.
I'm not getting that option out of support.
So it has not been installed correctly.
Okay.
The .NET 5 has not been installed correctly. You'll have to install it separately. You can go and fix the installation, but right now you just look at this screen. It will take you a long time to do that.
Yes.
But your installation has caused the problem. Okay. All right. So I'm going in for manage NuGet packages for solution. And I'm just going to follow the same steps that I've asked you all to follow. So I'll just one by one copy these and install this. So go into browse and install. Okay. Right. Please be careful. If you're working with .NET 5, do not pick 6. Pick what? Pick 5 point whatever. So pick up the latest version of 5, and that's not a problem. But do not pick a 6th version of it. Right? And install. Okay, I accept. I don't have any option. I bow to the superior being, whatever. Okay. I don't know why they ask us. We accept, because if you have to use it, we have to accept. What else? Second one here is the SQL server. And again, version 5 point whatever. Right. And the third one was Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.Tools. Right. And that also the version 5 point whatever. Okay, once you're finished doing this, okay, now there are going to be a few changes in here. First thing is, which database are we connecting to? Is it JK July 2022 or 22? I forgot the name. Your mind.
2022.
JK July 2022, right? This is what we are connecting to. Now we need to run this command. Let me explain what are the parts here. First part, can you figure out? It's fairly simple. What is this first part here? Up to integrate security equal to true. This is the connection string. Now, second part is it is actually calling code from some of the methods that are in this library. So in which library it is including those methods, we need to give a reference to this, saying that this is the library that we are actually working with. And thirdly, in which folder do you want the classes to be generated? So that is your output directory. So in which folder I want it to be generated? In the models folder. So in my project, the models folder, that is where it's going to actually create this. So I'm going to give this at the package manager console level. So which means you need to go into the tools, NuGet package manager, and do this in the command line. Okay, and paste. Now my models directory will not initially contain anything, and if I've given everything correctly here, then it will actually go and install. It will copy the classes into the models folder. So at this point, it's actually connecting to the database to examine the database and create your models for you. Okay. So the models folder should contain this. Right. So these are the classes that were generated for you. Okay. If you see the classes that got generated, very similar to what we had earlier, the department, this thing which contains, does this look familiar? Fairly similar to what had happened earlier. Second one was employee, again familiar. And what are the third thing it had? Third thing it has generated is what? The DB context class, the class that inherits from DB context. So what will this contain now? What does this contain here? A collection of employees and departments. Now, we could have written down this code there also, but we didn't. And here also, I'm not going to go into this. This is going to the specifics of entity framework. You can actually specify how your table should be, configured, or how it should be actually taken up here. All of this can be specified here. Okay. So these are the values that are being read from the database, and you can actually go and change all of this. So I'm not changing this, but this is how it's generating the code for it. All right, so that's the second step done. Next what? Actually, you can specify the next step here, and then maybe fourth step can be third, or third step can be fourth. So ideally this step we will do first. Let's do this step first. Okay. So if you look at the connection strings, okay, if you look at the connection strings, I'm going to go and add that into app settings.json. Okay. I'm going to add that into app settings.json, and this is what I'm doing. This again would be what? AK July 2022. I'm relying on you all to this thing to tell me the right answer. Okay, if my database is not correct, then it will not connect out here. Now this context name, the name of this connection string, should match with the name of the context class that has been created here. So what is the name of this context class? JK July 22 context, the name of this class, and the name of this should match. Okay. Other things are fairly simple. That's your connection string. So I've done the fourth step first. Okay. And then I'll come back to the adding that service in startup.cs. So I'll come back and make changes here. So in my startup.cs, I need to specify the option here. It's giving me an error because I don't have a using on top. So for example, use SQL Server. It's missing a using Microsoft.entity framework core so and so. Second thing, the get connection string, instead of reading it from this, what are the connection string name out here? JK July 22 context. So that's the name here. And the name of the class here was again what? JK July 22 context. It's again missing a using directive. So you just basically are replacing it with the actual names that you're using rather than these names. That's it. So after creating the classes, we needed to give in the connection string in the app settings.json and specify that this service is now, required. The entity framework service is required in the configure services. That's it. That's all that we need to do. Okay. Any changes require you to build this? All right. And the next is pretty simple. So all that we're doing here is creating a controller, add a controller. And these screens are familiar to you. So MVC controller with views using the entity framework. Model class was, let's say, employee. Data context class was this the one. And you'll find that it's, the options it's asking you for are, very, very familiar options. There's no change in it. All right, now the place where we are setting the startup has changed. Remember, earlier we would do it in the root config. It's now actually coming up in startup, where instead of the home controller, I could make it employees controller. That was the controller name that I had generated. The code is going to be slightly different. I'll take up index. Okay, I'll take up index. So this is the code that it has generated. This is the code that it has generated, which makes it look quite different from what we are used to. Okay. Now, why is it looking different? What are they calling here? If you notice, what are they doing here? What is this? All of this is what? Instead of calling the regular functions, they're calling the await. And with await, you're actually calling a task. So rather than generate a sync call, they're calling it with an asynchronous code out here. Rather than having synchronous code, they're having asynchronous. But they're doing this just to show off a little bit. They're not doing it because it has to be done that way. They're just saying, see, this is how you could write asynchronous code. Now, if you had to make this synchronous code, right? Instead of returning a task of this, you could return what? Just this. So await goes away. And instead of toList async, just call it toList. What does toList do? Do you recollect immediately what it's doing?
The immediate execution.
Right? So anyway, so this is what we are doing. So instead of this code that it generated, which was an async call, I have simply made it a synchronous call. That's all that I'm doing. See here also, everywhere, they're just trying to show off a little bit. I'm not joking. They're actually trying to show off a little bit. Wherein instead of calling first or default async, if you remove the async keyword, it will return what? It will return the same thing in a synchronous manner. Are you getting? Anyway, they're not improving on this. Why are they not improving on this? Because when you're doing an await, what does it do? It's a waiting call in any case. So I'm not joking. They're literally trying to show off. This is a different team from Microsoft, which is generating the code. Okay. The .NET Core team is different. So they're like, see how cool we are. We're giving you async code. Right. So if it scares you off, all that you do is what? If you're not clear about this, if you're clear, then use this. If you're not clear about this, do what? Remove async wherever you see async. You remove this, remove await wherever you see await. Remove await, remove async, remove task of this and make it return only a simple list. And there you have your synchronous code. So I'm not doing it. I'll do the index with a synchronous call. Okay. Others, let it remain like that. This is the code that they had given. Let's try running this. So this is your database that we had connected to. If everything works fine, then I should be able to see the records on the index and then call all the code on the other pages. Okay. And all the other pages are similar. If you go into the views and all that also, they're very, very similar to what you have been working with. So yes, there are configuration changes, and yes, unless you use them, you will not know how to work. Okay. So the simple thing that you do is what? You example that we have tried out with .NET framework, you try it out with .NET Core, you will get the confidence. If you're stuck, get help on how to do it in there and work with this. I'm sharing this file with you. What I'm also sharing with you is a couple of tutorials that I would like you to run. Okay. So I'm just putting this in the chat window. If you can please copy paste. All those who want to use it can copy paste onto your machine and work with this. So the first tutorial is for the one that we have done in our examples, the one that is using .NET framework. The second one is a tutorial for .NET Core. And this can just be sort of like a revision class for you, right? I won't be meeting you after this. So just as a revision, you can actually have this sort of a thing where you can go through the tutorial. Some of the concepts that we have covered will be there. Some of the concepts we have covered may not be there, but some of the extra concepts may also be there. So a lot of things are available here. Use this in your spare time. I would have loved to carry on. Another 1 month, I would have loved to carry on. But these guys don't let me. I hope Nisha is not listening. Okay. Yeah, and it's just being recorded, so I'm sure Dr. Johnson will not look through the recording. But anyway, so I keep telling them that give me more time with .NET, and they say no, sorry, we've got 2 weeks. 2 weeks is what you have. I still managed to try and get a little more time, but in the time that we have, this is all that we have time for. So I'm ending the session here. All right. And I wish you all well. What else can I say in terms of wherever you might land up? Firstly, I hope that you all get the technologies that you all are aiming for. I mean, I know you all have certain preferences and it's perfectly okay to have them. So I just hope that you get what you are aiming for. But even if you don't get that, do not worry. All right. Don't be disheartened or whatever. Because sometimes what happens is you get into a company They take you in as a certain this thing, but then they get a different project and they put you onto a different project. So, at this point, you have very little choice. So look out for a good company. If there's a good company, good package, go ahead and take it up. All right. Anything that you all would like to ask me before we end the session? All right. So are you all done with all your lectures? So there's still, I think, one module still going on, right? Last one.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Last module.
Expected to get over in the next 3-4 days, whatever.
Yes, sir. This week, Friday or
This
Saturday.
Friday. Okay. And then you all get into exam mode. Right?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So wish you all the best. All the best for your exam, firstly. Then all the best for your projects. Then all the best for your interviews. And that's where life starts. After the interviews, once you get in the company, all the best for your, future, whatever direction that takes you. All right.
Yes.
And
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
and just one last advice on you. After 6 months of CDAC, you'll be, I don't want to open another book ever. That probably might be a reaction from you. But try and every day that you're, when you've started off learning or when you've started off coding, every day, if you can pick up one new concept, any one concept, it could be even one new method that you learn. But every day, just learn one thing new, right? Because it's very, the industry changes quickly, the technology changes quickly. So you get outdated very quickly. So every day, that's my suggestion to you. Every day, one little thing. It can be one new method. I don't mind. One overload of a method. I don't mind. Anything, any one new thing a day. Yes, I have learned this one new thing, whatever technology you're working on. Okay, once you're on the jobs. Because then sometimes what happens is then you have got work pressure, your learning stops. And then suddenly 2 years later, you find that you don't know what is the new trend in the industry. So do that. All right. Thank you, everybody. You have been a wonderful batch. All right.
Sir.
And
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much,
sir.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
bye-bye. Signing off.
Sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
So can you just upload, like, you are going to upload the files today, right?
Yes.
Because the last lecture files are not uploaded yet, I think.
Yes.
Not uploaded. I
No, sir,
uploaded
yes.
immediately.
No, sir, it was
Oh,
not.
they are not there.
They didn't get uploaded, is it?
Yes.
Why didn't you ask me earlier? No, I'll tell you what I did after.